Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Helen. How are you? Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Glenn. Maybe his audio isn't on.
I don't know. He'll get it.
Well, that might make the meeting shorter. Sorry, that wasn't very nice, was it?
Well, it's accurate. We all love Glenn.
Absolutely. I'm pretty much a data junkie and love digging into details because I've been in financial reporting my entire career.
Right.
Glenn makes me look like I don't look at anything.
Yeah, Len does it on a different level, right?
Yep. Which is good. I wasn't
Sure.
saying that in a negative way.
No, not at all. I didn't take it in a negative way. How are your holidays?
Pretty quiet. And yours?
Followed by pound.
Yeah, quite. They were good. They're fine, but like you're low
You
key.
have not
Yeah.
entered any numbers. Please re-enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Who's
That might be Glenn. Hey, Len.
There's Len.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to
I'll let Charlie Guadagnolo in. Does anybody know who 914?
enter the meeting
282.
as panelist. Attendees can now hear you speak. This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Len.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Hello. Good, good.
Hi, Len.
Hey,
Happy
good
New
evening.
Year.
Happy New Year.
Is Charles raising his hand?
Charles, are you in? You should be able to talk. Now he's back in. Charles?
In the past, he's had to call in as well. He's had trouble.
Hello, I'm here.
Hey, Glenn.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I was gonna wish that everybody had a happy holiday, but at this point, I think it's more like the Survivors Club.
Yeah, this is true.
You know what? At this point, as long as we're all healthy, that's a good thing.
It's really all it counts almost.
Charles, can you hear us?
What the heck? Hello? Yes, Charles. I'm on the phone with Charles. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. I have. Okay. Oh, I think Tom has to.
I promoted him. Can you?
Oh, you
see
did,
what-
Tom?
Yeah, I did promote him.
Oh, okay. He says he's on the website, but he can't. What did you say? You can't get through, right? Okay, he doesn't have audio.
Tell him to try to come in again. Can he hear us?
Hold on. Hold. Yeah, Tom, and colleagues, he doesn't have audio on his computer. It sort of crashed. So he's calling in on the phone. Can you hear us on the computer? Do you hear people talking, Charles?
Hi, Charles. That's a test.
Okay. So no, he doesn't hear anyone.
Okay, so you want to put him on speakerphone?
Okay. All right. So
But
I can put you
call
on, I can put you on speaker on my, yeah.
Could he call in and just put in the web and that he's a panelist. That's what I did.
Oh, really? You're on the phone, Glenn?
Yes. I have
That's
the same
what-
problem with my,
Although, as I understand it, Charles doesn't have didn't get an invite. So the phone number is on the invite.
You didn't get an invite. Well, can we forward him the invite?
So I thought I didn't get an invite and Sally suggested
hear
I
it, Charles?
look at spam, but it turned out that it was in other. Tell Charles to look at other for the invite.
well, also
Charles?
he has to sign into the Village of Mamaroneck
hear
site
people?
now.
No, actually, for some reason you're coming. Hold on. All right, try now.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
So we could, well, I guess we could just forward you the invite.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that right now.
All right, Tom is doing that right now.
Thank you.
I just sent you an invite for time in your VMO net address. Oh, you know what I have here is Sally says, wait, let me just see if I can. Sally is saying that she sent it to, I thought I had it, but Sally's saying she sent it to your VOM address. VOM and.
Correct.
So.
Right,
Ellen,
but mine wasn't in the, so when we log into the VOM mail,
yeah,
there's a column that says other. And that's where my invite was. It wasn't in the focus conversations. Because I reached out
Well,
to
we-
Sally saying I didn't get the invitation.
yeah, I remember that, yeah.
All right.
We can give him out the number, the web ID and the participation ID.
Hold
I
on.
have that right. Then he can call it. He's got to call in 1-646-558-8656. The web ID is 894-2633-5244.
No, 6233, not 26.
Yeah.
62.
Yeah.
You said 26.
Right.
I think.
I'm sorry. And then participation number is 154129. So he should be able to call in.
Can you hear all this, Charles?
Yeah, Cliff actually sent instructions to get into the village mail and it went to spam. So I'm going into that now and think I'm going to be able to do this.
And I think I think we probably don't have Ed and Bill because all the emails about the meeting went to the village mailbox,
Yeah.
which I only stumbled on accidentally because my iPad died. So I was resetting it up and I saw the email from Charles with the agenda in the village mailbox.
Charles, what's your email for Village of Mamaroneck email? I'm forwarding him the invite.
It should be
I
C,
was able to get into my village mail because it was in the spam. So I have the invite now because I'm in the village
Okay.
mail. So I'm
Okay.
gonna call in.
All right.
Okay.
All right. He has the invite if people didn't hear him. And he's gonna call in.
all right.
Okay, good.
But we need to make sure going forward that Ed and Bill use the village email,
Yeah,
because I'm sure that's why they're not here tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks to you, Ellen, I would have, I'd be out.
No, but you at least remembered it was the first Wednesday of the month and we meeting, so you started
you
that
good?
conversation.
what?
You good?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I think we're doing good.
Hi, Augie.
There's a couple of hiccups where folks have to use their village email, but just something that's gonna work out.
Do you need me to do anything?
No, I don't think so, pal.
All right,
Yes.
my cell's ready if you need me.
Can you buy me a winning Powerball ticket, please? I'll split it with you.
If I could, I would. Good
Happy
evening,
New
everybody.
Year, Augie.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Take care, buddy.
Happy
You
New Year.
better. Charles, is this you okay. Hold on. Charles, is that you 914-282-3069? Charles?
There we go, Tom.
All right,
thank
there you
you.
are. All right, good. All
Excellent.
right, now we're cooking with gas. Meeting is yours, folks.
I apologize. The Village of Amerenik email instructions went to spam and all the rest of it. So
Okay,
sorry about that.
no problem, buddy.
All right. So we have, who do we have here now? We have Len, Ellen, Glenn.
And yourself.
Is Ed on?
All right, so we're missing Ed and Bill, but we have a quorum.
Who's taking minutes this one?
Well, it's Ed's turn.
Oh,
So,
and I did the last one, I think.
no, Bill did the last
Bill
one.
did the last one, okay.
I think you were before Bill, so I guess it's my turn.
All right.
All right. I got it.
All right. So we have a quorum, a motion to open the January Village of Amerenik Budget Advisory Committee meeting.
I make a motion to open the meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And can a motion to approve the November meeting minutes with our not having had a December meeting?
I make a. Go ahead,
Ellen.
Glenn.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, great. So I guess right into board participation. So Ed and Bill are not on. Ed and Bill have regularly attended the meetings. We have our term renewals in place. I think the variable was John Campbell that we were going to discuss and address. I think Dan was tasking himself with reaching out to John in the context of John not having participated now for a number of months, and that we were probably planning on assuming he was no longer participating. With Dan no longer the liaison, I don't know where that left off.
I'll follow up with it tomorrow, Charles.
But I think John's term was up anyway. Charles, I think it was you, John, and me at the same time. So I'm guessing John was not interested in re-upping since he didn't ask to be reconsidered.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
So you have an open spot there. Unless we filled it. I don't remember filling it though.
I've reached out to a couple of people unsuccessfully. I'll keep trying.
You know, if we just approved that fact-finding junket to Vegas for the casino, I'm getting more interest.
Now that you know all about the fund balance, you got something to play with.
Yeah, but maybe Dan Sarnoff can get us grants to like go to all these places.
Wait me 1 second. I'm just pulling up the terms so we can just confirm this. I think you're right, Ellen. Can you guys see my screen with the membership
Yeah.
pulled up?
Yep, yeah,
Yeah.
so John was expiring with us, Charles.
Yeah, so are we all in agreement that, you know, I guess, given the number of months that went by with him not participating, not having heard from him, right now the assumption is he's no longer going to be continuing and that
I
we
would-
need to find a replacement?
I would agree with that, especially since I don't remember if it was Augie or Sally or both of them who reached out to the three of us saying our term is up and if we're still interested, please let them know. He had that opportunity as well.
Well,
Mhm.
if he didn't get reappointed in the organizational meeting, he's done. Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm gonna
That
check.
makes sense. And there's language, if you miss X number of meetings
Yes.
in a row or X number of meetings in total, and it's been exceeded, and
Gotcha.
that's where we're at. With that, Bill, who is not with us tonight, but again, who regularly attends the meetings, he had approached me about the possibility of changing our day from the first Wednesday to the first Tuesday of the month.
Wait, Charles, before you go there, back with, the committee structure, Glenn started an email chain, I believe during the month of December, since we need to reappoint a chair. So can we make it official? I think via email, we all agreed that as long as you're okay with it, that you would continue to be our chairperson.
That I'd be honored. Appreciate it.
All right, so are we all good with that?
I think we're all good with it.
Yep, I
Okay.
think so.
Excellent. All right, now continue, Charles, sorry.
No, thank you. Yeah, so Bill, who, again, not here tonight, regularly participates, he had approached me about the possibility of moving the meetings from the first Wednesday to the first Tuesday of the month. So I told him I would add that to the agenda, discuss it with the group. That works for me, probably a little bit better than the Wednesday, but I'm flexible and wanted to go around the horn and see everybody's thoughts.
It's fine with me.
I'm okay
Fine
with
with me.
it. I guess the question is Tom, is there a
Yeah.
conflict? Do you have a conflicts on first Tuesdays of the month?
Do I have a conflict?
Yeah,
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Tuesdays, I usually have, sometimes I have Westchester Joe Waterworks, but that's in the afternoon.
okay.
So, no, whatever you guys want to do. If you want to do the Tuesday to Wednesday, they both should be fine with me. But I appreciate your asking.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if, I know you're super busy with these types of things. So if things change, I think the group is flexible, and we'll just go from there. But for now, we'll make a motion to move the meetings to the first Tuesday of the month.
I make a motion to move the meeting to the first Tuesday of the month.
Do we
Second,
have a second?
second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye, great.
So February 1st, huh? Okay.
Is that really the first Tuesday?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
So I had as the next item to, recap the understanding the fund balance webinar, and thought that, sharing that for those who missed it, and as did I, but in general would be valuable. But maybe before we go there, being that Tom is now our liaison, it would probably be appropriate to shelve that and jump right in with probably getting Tom's feedback about kind of where we're at as a committee, where things are at in general in the process. And I think, as was a priority for the committee at large, and now this is great that we have the direct contact, was wanting to hear your thoughts just about how you thought this committee could best serve the village, what you thought the priorities could be, and that could help set up, the structure of our, game plan and agenda for the upcoming year. If everybody's in agreement with, going there, and if Tom, you're comfortable with kind of jumping in with that.
Yeah, let me give you a rough outline, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't, ready for this, but it's fine. I'm very really ready for anything I do. So, but I guess one of the things that I hope that the committee can look at is ways in which we can enhance revenue other than obviously taxes, right? Because the truth of the matter is, in my view, right, is that costs are going to remain, pretty much static. Maybe 100,000 here, 100,000 there, as we move forward. So, what's the best way of either increasing services or alleviating tax burden is to increase revenue. So, I guess one of the things I would ask, and I don't want to have this, be just my idea, but and people can work on whatever you want. But one of the things that I think would be helpful is if the budget committee could look at other communities and see ways in which the other communities are raising revenue that maybe we haven't thought of. Outside of obviously the real estate tax.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I think, Tom, if I could just jump in,
Sure.
that's a good segue. I know, I can't remember, Alan, if Charles sent the document on the suggestions for the 22-23 budget process.
Yes, it was
sent to the
sent in
board?
November. Yeah,
To the full board?
yes.
Oh,
It was sent to the full board, including Tom, as well as Augie, Jerry, and Dan Sarnoff.
Okay,
Nora had responded,
okay.
asking if possible for it to be on one of the work session meetings, but I think that meeting was too jammed up, too many other things.
Yeah, I'm bringing this up now, Tom, because thanks to Alan, within that document, one of the things which makes we'd like to think constructive changes to the budget process, which is sort of a focus, tilting the focus to just what you said, the revenue
Yep.
side, which I think we all agree is a good idea. And then also focusing on the capital budget. And there are a number of other process and scheduled suggestions to try to make it, let's say, not as burdensome on the staff, the budget process, and a few other suggestions. And one of the suggestions was that we meet with the full board and get their input, just like you've given us, if that's possible during a work session. But I think the basic point here is that the focus of that, one of the important focus of that document was the revenue side. Obviously excluding the property tax.
Right.
Right.
Which
The
is
other,
always an option, but anyway.
right. The other thing also, which Len just alluded to, we're here to serve the board. And I think one of the things that we've been missing is input from the board as to what you would like us to do. So Tom, your comment is perfect. But there has to be other things you would like us to do besides looking at potential revenue streams.
No, yeah, I
We're-
understand.
We're here for you.
I really do appreciate that. And I will find other things that I think your talents would be applied to. I just wasn't, I wasn't really prepared for tonight,
Which is fine.
That's fine. Yeah.
but
We put you on the spot.
I really appreciate the help.
I think if we look at everyone on the committee, we've got a lot of varied backgrounds and I think a whole lot of experience that could definitely help. But we've kind of been picking and choosing what we should be focusing on as opposed to the board picking and choosing what we should focus on.
Okay.
And since we're here for you, it should be what you would like, or, what Jerry and Augie, might appreciate.
Why don't I try and get Jerry or Augie to come to the meeting next month, and then we'll put you on the agenda for the meeting after that to talk to the Board of Trustees.
Excellent.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Yep.
So This way, I mean, between us, I mean, right now, one of the issues that's facing the upper management is there are a few important people out with various illnesses.
Yeah,
And so they're spread pretty thin, and they're trying to, do triage in a lot of areas. So hopefully in the next few weeks, everybody will be back up to strength. But a couple of people had operations, another person's out with a long-term illness. And then, we have this COVID thing going on, so that half of the staff like just comes into the office one day, and the next day, the other half of the staff comes, they work from home. It's not like they're not
Yeah, yeah.
working.
Yep.
But the idea being that, everybody's not gonna get sick at the same time.
Yeah, keep at least a few people healthy.
Yes, exactly. And I'll tell you, I get the COVID numbers of people in the village with COVID. And in the last month, it's gotta be 700 people.
Wow. But
Yeah.
I wonder, I'm not trying to downplay how transmissible this variant is, but I wonder if the numbers are going up so much because so many more people are getting tested.
Maybe that might be true, Ellen, but I, on the other side of the coin is, I know a bunch of people who have just taken a rapid test. And the rapid test came out positive, and they were like, all right, I'm not gonna wait 6 hours in line to get a PCR.
Right.
And the PCR is what turns up, the PCR is what turns up on the health department.
But, I think starting going into Thanksgiving, where Fauci and the CDC, and they weren't wrong with saying this, get tested
Yeah.
before you go to large gatherings.
Yep.
And that's, when the numbers started increasing. But that's also when Omicron started
Yeah,
spreading.
okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
but Ellen, nationwide, we're recording nationwide over 1 million cases
I know, it's
Yeah.
mind boggling.
in a day. That
It's-
never happened before.
It's completely mind boggling.
Yeah.
It's
really
also
is.
the percentage. New York was having like 20% of the people tested coming back positive.
Yeah,
And just case in point, I had a friend of mine who had it, and basically I probably had it about a week ago. I didn't go get tested. I knew what the symptoms were. I spoke to him. He goes, "You'll be waiting in line for 5 hours. By the time you get the test results back, your quarantine will be over." So basically, all I did was over the holidays, I just quarantined for over 10 days. I'm not even planning to see anybody again until this Thursday.
Wow. But that's the right thing to do.
Yep.
So thank you, Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, look, I got a lot of friends in the exact same position right now. They didn't go get tested. I said, we know we have it, and it's a lot of self-quarantine going on.
Yeah. Also, like a husband will get it, and then the wife gets sick, and she goes, I'm not getting, I know I got it because I got it from him, or vice versa.
Exactly.
So-
One thing I wanted to mention, when you talk about revenue, one of the things that we also have to do is it's the cost of the revenue. Because revenue itself does nothing if all it is break even. It might be a
Right.
great program and everything,
You're talking
which
about the
is
net.
fine, but
Yeah.
actually look at.
Right. So Glenn, anything that we implement would need a cost benefit analysis.
Yes. Right. You're
And
talking
when
about
we
the net.
break
Yeah.
even, so I remember in last year's budget calls, and I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, the new,
Parks and Recreation.
no, it wasn't Parks and Rec. It was the guy
Jason?
who was doing the kayak racks to
Okay.
rent out.
Oh, Jeff,
Jason?
no,
Yeah.
it's the harbor master, Jeff.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I forget
And
his
he
last name.
immediately said the break even was less than a year. It's gonna cost me this to build. This is what we're gonna be billing out, and if my projections are correct, we break even immediately. So that's the kind of analysis we would need to do on anything.
Correct. Good point by both of you.
So Charles, you just put up the schedule
I did. So this is the document that Ellen was you and Ellen were referring to.
Okay.
That, indeed, if we're able to, a couple of cycles from now, meet to discuss with the board at large, that'd be great. If in the upcoming meeting, if Augie and Jerry are available to review this preemptively, that seems like that would make a lot of sense as well. For the here and now, this section, which sort of highlights what our role could be in the context of the broader schedule throughout the year, might be a good focus for those conversations to see how we're envisioning the schedule flowing, and then how, we can add value in the process, across the upcoming months.
Tom, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm about to, so I apologize in advance. Did you get a chance to look at this document when Charles sent it out?
No, I'll look at it
Okay.
tonight.
All right, so we'd love to have your feedback.
Yes. Charles, would you do me a favor and send it to me tonight so I don't have to go looking for it?
Yep.
And I apologize, but things have just been.
Well, I mean, that's obvious.
No, that's fine.
It's
No reason
obvious
to-
why. I think, Tom, it's dated September, the end of September.
Oh, so I
Yeah.
might have looked at it and just.
Yeah, but my guess is, given what happened in September, you might have been otherwise. So,
Thank you for recognizing that.
or early October, okay.
Yeah.
Either way.
It's amazing that people are still dealing with cleanup. Oh,
Oh, yeah, it's,
I mean, I finally finished my work 2 weeks ago.
so you're back in order?
Yep, I'm back in order.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
But compared to so many people, I wasn't in my living quarters and it took me that long.
Wow.
So I feel really badly for people who had damage in their living space.
I think that we still have some families with children living in hotels in White Plains, and the kids taking a bus to Merrick Avenue School.
Yes,
Ugh.
that I know, Tom, from the CRC, the
Yeah.
Community Resource Center stuff. So,
Wow.
The one thing I'm grateful for my father is when he moved to the village of Mamaroneck, he decided to buy his home on Hill Street. Emphasis on the word hill.
Yeah.
Lessons to be learned, Glenn. When I bought my house, I thought, oh, what a cute little babbling brook.
It is cute, 99% of the time.
Right. Yep, it is.
so it would be good if you get a chance to take a look at this, Tom, before we meet again.
I promise you I will.
And
because
if you could get us your feedback before we meet again, because we may be able to do some tweaking
Okay.
before then. I mean, so some of the highlights, Tom, just so you know, we were proposing that since, let's back up a little. Ed and I met with Augie over the summer to discuss the bonding process, having nothing to do with this per se. And at the end of that discussion, Augie brought up the budget process, and he said that he generally issues the first cut of the expense budget in January, but he doesn't get a lot of the costs until February.
Right.
So he feels like he's kind of spinning his wheels and wasting your time as well, because you're now going to look at something that's going to change.
Right.
And ask questions on something that's not real anyway. So we were proposing pushing out the expense part of the operating budget until later, when we got more of those costs in, like pension, insurance premiums and so forth. And that made up about 82% of the expense budget. So there's really only 18% to play with.
Right.
And that's minimal. But instead spend December, January, and February, just what you said, focusing on revenue streams. Because with the meetings with the department heads, we never really seem to discuss that. Or very briefly. So we're just trying to change the focus a little.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Sounds
think,
good.
and also on that, we would stay away from, I'll say, the pens and paper and pencils, not worry about the smaller line items,
Exactly.
but, focus on the revenue and the capital budget, which
Yep.
from what we can tell, still has some work to be done. So might be helpful to discuss that as well, Tom.
We were also suggesting changing the meetings with the department heads. Instead of them going through line by line of their expense plan, which doesn't really add a whole lot, and I think it bores everybody to death. Let them go right to the bottom line of their expense plan, and if it's up year over year, explain the drivers of that, and just leave it at that point, but then have the department heads also talk where it's applicable about either their revenue streams or capital
Capital
requests.
budget,
Capital needs.
Yep.
and not separate, treat the capital budget totally separate, because there are large capital needs in the village, as you know, Tom. So,
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
but as
Yeah,
long as
and to the-
Dan keeps going on a roll, getting us all these grants, we're in good shape.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
and just to recap where we left off with the capital budget planning principles documents that we had worked on, and a lot went into that. We got feedback from Jerry and presumably other staff with comments to reincorporate. We did go through trying as best as we could to really capture all of that feedback, incorporate it into the document, and we distributed that as well, and thought it would be a good next step to, when meeting at some point with the board at large and Jerry and Augie, to look at where that document ended up, see if there's additional changes that either you guys or we would want to make, and have that be available. There's a lot in it, but it's consolidated. I think it was incorporated in the front of the village budget itself.
Actually,
So,
Charles,
and then from there has been revised. So, our bringing that home would be great, and it's a valuable tool for us to be able to reference just on an ongoing basis as a consolidated framework.
so Charles, when you sent out the this document that you have open to the board, you also included the revised capital plan framework document?
Correct.
Right, so tonight,
and-
when you send Tom the budget document, why don't you send him the capital framework document as well?
Yeah, I'll resend both, and not to overwhelm Tom, but that'll be there as well.
Thank you.
And there's so much within. These are pretty consolidated, but at the same time, dense documents with a lot of different things to be able to touch on. So using them as a framework for our planning process as a committee, in conjunction with you guys, and then being able to look at the different components and help use that as ways to identify, where we could be of help. It's a nice way to have it in front of us. And then what's pulled up on the screen now is also, an idea of how the broader schedule flows, and then how we can interject, our efforts throughout the year relative to the schedule.
Okay.
Augie and I had.
I'll take a good, I'm
Sorry, go
actually off next week, so I'll take a good look at it.
Hey, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Augie and I had touched base, maybe 6 weeks ago, as per the committee, about inviting him to
Okay.
join one of the meetings. But now that he's probably planning on coming next month, that's great. And Jerry as well, to get that feedback, and also from Augie, just an idea of what reports are available. There's a lot out there. and what he's envisioning as far as, just the tools that are available and, how we can work with that.
Okay,
And again, how we could benefit him at all, what he would
Sure.
envision.
sounds like a great plan. Thank you.
All right, cool.
I mean, as far as I know too, revenue this year is coming in better than expected.
Excellent.
That's good.
Incredible.
Well, let me unfortunately put a little damper on that, Tom. Your sales tax in much higher. In fact, you could add to your sales tax, you could add $400,000 tomorrow. The problem is your beach revenue did not come in, your parking did not come in, your fines and forfeitures didn't come in. So I can add $410,000 to the sales tax tomorrow. I could also subtract $410,000 that you're not going to have in revenue. So right now it's kind of a toss-up, how much higher sales tax goes and your mortgage tax.
Yeah,
So
so
most of your coming in light.
yeah, I don't think they came in that light though.
Oh yeah, in fact, I was gonna bring it up on Monday, but this is something else that when we did the bond conference, at some point the trustees should actually look at what your budget is and make your adjustments to what the actual numbers are coming in. And you could do that, probably do that the second week in January, because you have a lot of numbers that have come in and they're done. The beach attendance number is finished. We know that. The parking at the harbor is finished. That doesn't start again this year. The renting of the pavilion is finished. That doesn't come in this year. And then the street parking is, coming in at half, it's less than half of the overall revenue. It's running about 200,000 short. You need to do 60,000 a year, and you'd still be 100,000 short this year. And fines and forfeitures are just coming in short.
So
Nobody.
Glenn, how's the parking at the train station?
Parking at the train station, I really haven't looked at, because you're not gonna, that all comes in by permit, probably starting February, March. That's when you'll see. Right now, there's no revenue at the train station, but the permit's up in June, and that revenue doesn't even start for another month or so. The overall street parking is going to be at least $100,000 light.
We should have had some train station parking revenue for people signing up during the year. And the only reason why I'm asking was in a conversation.
Why don't we wait for Augie to get here, and I'll make sure he has those numbers, so
Okay.
we have.
Yeah,
numbers,
thank
and
you,
we're not
Tom.
just.
Yep.
Thank you. I don't think we ought to have numbers flying around. Plus, we've still got more than 6 months
Yeah,
in the fiscal year.
Got 5 months.
5 months. Well, you're counting January? You got to count January. January just started.
Yeah, but our year is June.
Yeah, May
December is
31st. Yeah.
month.
Yeah. All right. 5 months.
5.5.
5.5. That's almost 50%.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
The other item on the agenda tonight, which is kind of a loaded topic, but I thought, whoever had the opportunity to attend, if you just wanted to share with the group, if there were any, consolidated takeaways that you could share that might go above and beyond what might be, assumed or typical, and things that we are doing and, might be able to communicate and do going forward.
I did attend the seminar, which I thought was very well done. There are a couple of schedules that we're supposed to be producing that I don't think we do. I need to go back to be more specific. But the one thing that I could not get my head wrapped around, and I'm hoping you can all clear the mud for me, is the restricted balance. Because that, to me, as they were talking about it, seems somewhat contradictory. It was restricted, but yet it's being used for ABC. So I don't know how it's restricted if it's got a use.
Well, the term that they used, Ellen, was reserved and unreserved. Okay, there now within the
Right.
reserved, which is restricted, is that restricted to particular uses. For example,
Right,
I was happy to see, and we had discussed as part of the capital framework, you may recall, creating a capital reserve fund,
Yep.
which can be done. In other words, what we're saying, Tom, is because we anticipated, this was going back when we started this, setting aside money for capital projects that would be forthcoming, that the village might consider creating a capital reserve fund to deposit some of the surpluses, because even though we appropriate a portion of fund balance at the beginning of the budget year, we always, it seems recently, end up with a large surplus or a sizable surplus, which is not bad, but we should think about that in the context of the overall fund balance. My point is that restricted and reserved, we could say we want to set aside certain money for particular purposes, or if we get a grants or some outside money, which is restricted, then that would be part of that same category.
Yeah.
So,
I think like an example of a restricted fund would be the water fund. Right? You gather this money based upon water fees,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's supposed to be used to pay for, repairs and capital projects.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think
the other one would be like you just did a tree fund, where you're looking. You have a tree fund that if you for the fines that get collected for cutting down the trees, it's then going to go into the tree fund, and those funds are going to be purposed for a particular thing. In other words, once there's $1 million in the tree fund, everything above that would be used to buy trees. You have the recreation fund. So what they wanted you to do is you can take all the funds that you have that are restricted like that, and then you at some point you should say, if the balance goes above such amount, what the funds are actually going to be used for and used for that purpose. So if we say we want to have a fund that has $1 million in it, if it goes above the $1 million, how does the village plan to spend that money? And that's one of the things that they spoke about on the conference, is you can have a half a dozen different, funds, donations, or else, and it's okay to have the funds, and you decide what the fund balance is going to be. The nothing to do with setting fund balances, but you should be able to explain to the auditor why you have that fund balance and what your purpose for the fund balance is.
Right, but I think where I was getting somewhat confused is, and Tom, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the board passed a resolution that we would keep 30% of the operating budget in reserve in case of a crisis, whatever. So to me, that pot needs to be untouched.
Well,
Unless there's a crisis.
that's a policy, right? It's not a law.
No, I know. I said we passed maybe I misspoke in my terms, but so we've got that 30%. So let's make numbers. I'm going to make it 33%, but let's say we've got 15 million in the reserves. So we know 5 million is in case of an emergency crisis situation that we need to have. To me, that money can't be touched. So that to me is what's unrestricted. And that's where I was getting confused with the terminology.
Yeah, but that money is unrestricted, you say?
No, is restricted. I'm sorry.
Right, but that isn't, I think that when you went to the conference, there's stuff that's, restricted by law and there's stuff that's unrestricted. See, I guess that 30% is not restricted by law as New York State looks at it.
That's,
Okay.
that's absolutely
Village of
correct.
Mamaroneck policy.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
Now, the policy question, Ellen, is if our reserves, the 30%, whatever that number is, if it exceeds that amount, how do we handle that?
And I think it was 37% the last time I looked.
Okay. That's fairly close in the scheme of life, it seems. But in theory, and this is what I heard at the controllers session, then if your reserves are above what the village considers reasonable, they use that term, then that money and effectively should be used to reduce taxes. And because what the controller says they don't want to see is reserves building up to some unreasonable level. Or they should be set aside for one-time expenditures.
Right,
Things like that.
Yeah, but that's
which
kind of
is
like
what
we've been-
Tom said at the work session Glenn, Ed, and I attended over the summer when we discussed our capital plan. Tom did say we have all this money in the reserves. We could be using that. And that's very much in line with what we heard at the seminar.
Yeah, so
There's
that
one other thing, when we talk about we have unassigned funds, some of our funds, we actually borrow because we have, right now, we're spending a lot of money on capital projects, and we simply don't get the money back for a long period of time. Right now, we have a $3 million bridge. We have $8-9 million worth of sewers. We got 10 million. Yeah, Augie. Funded $5 million.
Hold on. We're not paying for the bridge.
No. Tom, I didn't say that. What I'm saying is we
No,
lay
but
the money
town
out.
of, that's coming out of the town of Mamaroneck, not us.
Yeah. But again, we have to wait for money to come back.
But it's not coming out.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything
Glenn, you
is
picked the
out.
wrong project.
Yes. You picked it.
So I think what Glenn is trying to get to is more of a cash flow.
No, he's
Cash
right.
flow issue.
A good
Right.
project to illustrate that would be the sewer project. Right,
Yeah.
we're taking that out of reserve, and if we hadn't got the grant, at the end of the year, we would then bond it and put the money into reserve. But, that's how it usually works. You pay out of the reserve. At the end of the year, Augie bonds that money, and that money goes back into the reserve from the bonding.
Correct.
But, thankfully, we got this big grant, and hopefully that'll take care of most of it.
So,
I mean, I agree with Ellen. It's basically a cash flow issue.
Yep.
Yes.
oh, absolutely. That's what I'm saying is sometimes that extra reserve is being used to take care of our cash flow so we don't have to do band bonds. So, but again, that's another number that, can be looked at. So,
Okay.
So what, and just to remind you, what Augie likes to do, and I think it's very good policy, is instead of going out and issuing bonds for various projects as they're going on, because every time you go out for a bond, you got to pay the bond lawyer, you got to pay bond fees.
Yeah.
So he gets, you get a better deal if you just do one big bond. You get a lower rate, and you don't have to pay the bond lawyer all these times and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think
Oh, no, he's been excellent at that. And that's what we did. You see that every year. Usually what he does is he presents to you guys in November, and then he actually goes out to purchase the bond, I believe, in February. If that's, I know he puts out the notification, and that's like in January, and I think February is when the bonds are actually purchased. That's kind of what the cycle is, and and that's great. The other thing we just have to be aware of is we have a lot of FEMA expenses this year. They've already spent $2.2 million for Jerry's already spent $2.2 million in additional expenses for Ida. Eventually, we'll get it back from FEMA, but exactly when? So that, again, that's a cash flow that we're spending the money. We will get it back from FEMA. The exact timing, you don't know.
Tom, I'll forward to you when we get off this call, a document that Ed and I put together after meeting with Augie on bonds. So just so you know what he shared with us.
sorry for that. I lost you for a minute. My battery died. I'm back on.
I'm gonna share a document with you that Ed and I put together after we met with Augie in the summer about bonds. So probably nothing you don't know, but just so you know what we know.
Gotcha.
One other thing I just want.
One other thing, and it's something that we have to look at as a community, not so much the village. Village isn't allowed to do fundraisers. Yet we have a lot of people in this village who quite frankly are very charitable, and it might be that we need to get more community participation to set up different organizations that can do fundraising to help the village supplement its programming and its revenues. You can
give me an example of what you're thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that you have a Marine Education Center, which occasionally people will make $100 donation for and everything. Maybe the week of the Fireman's Carnival, set up a little booth next to it, have a, whatever charity you need, charitable organization you need to be set for them, and then sell T-shirts and posters that are Marine education related, that maybe they can make $5,000 or $10,000 towards their expenses. The village itself isn't allowed to solicit money, but you can have you can have for virtually any function in the village a charitable organization that supports that function. In a lot of cases, we already do.
Let me ask a question on that. Why is it EMS is allowed to fundraise, but the volunteer fire department is not?
Well, the volunteer fire department does fundraise. The Fireman's Carnival is a fundraiser. They sell raffle tickets.
Okay.
They're set up under different parts of New York state law, and they're allowed to do that because they're all volunteer. They're part of the village, but they're also like a quasi. I wouldn't want to say a club. I don't want to characterize it because I'll mischaracterize it. So that they're allowed to. But what they can't do is, like, they can't fundraise for a truck. And they can't fundraise for fire equipment, right? But, basically the fundraisers go for is, pays for dinners at the firehouse, pays for, maybe they have a little scholarship for the fire kids. And, it just, because it's so important to the bottom line of our community, and, we have an all-volunteer fire department, for want of a better word, they have like a little social club.
No,
Yeah,
which is fine. I'm just,
Yeah, but that's what they're
EMS
fundraising for.
but EMS does do fundraising for a new ambulance. So why, I'm just trying to understand what
Yeah,
the difference in the regulations.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the answer to that. And-
Okay.
and I'm not,
It might be that it's not EMS, it might be Friends of EMS, which could be a charity that gives money to EMS. which is
No, it's
perfectly
EMS.
legal.
It's EMS. I get stuff in the mail every year.
Yeah, I get it
Every
too.
November or December, I
Okay.
get stuff in the mail.
I get it too, yeah.
Yep.
All right, but I hear what you're
One
saying.
other thing I want, one other thing I just wanted to share with Tom, and it might be obvious just how committees generally function, but that, we, over the last couple of years, had a subcommittee structure where we would break off into subgroups, focus on specific topics. That went at times from being very structured and very targeted across specific areas to sometimes when there was a heavier lift, it, morphosizing into everybody basically weighing in and contributing. But I think some of the subcommittee efforts, that were targeted produce some nice output, in addition to the two documents that I'll forward you tonight, which was really more of a collective effort. Over the longer term, there were some sub projects that, out of the gates, I think Jerry had requested that we take a look at the procurement policy, as did Dan. And we had a subcommittee that went through that effort, making proposed changes, then reconvening as a committee, taking that document, presenting it to the board, who I believe had adopted a number of those changes as an updated procurement policy, just as an example. Ellen took the lead on looking at, and this was something that Augie had shared, volunteer firefighter benefits across communities with a comparative analysis in the context of what appeared to be a higher rate of attrition in the village of Mamaroneck, and then looking at benefits and whether there was a path to be more competitive with that. I think Ellen also looked at, with a couple of others, the police, what they were
overtime.
charging,
Yeah.
for their overtime, and it was
Right.
determined that we were probably undercharging.
Right, that was
and
very
there was
helpful.
room to charge more. So things like that, we have these broader, really robust frameworks that we worked on, but then just as an example of how the subcommittee structure can work, if tasked with more specific things, that there can be value add there as well.
So to that point, Tom, some of the feedback Ed and I got from Augie over the summer was whether it's during a work session meeting or a board of trustees meeting, when a discussion about whatever comes up, one of the trustees who's a liaison for a given committee could say, oh, the traffic commission could look at that, or this committee could look at that. And that the budget committee has never volunteered to look at something. So,
I
I guess I'm asking you
I hear
to
where you're going.
volunteer us, because
That's
we
what I-
are, we're here to serve you.
I have gotten where I've gotten in this world by taking other people's hard work and getting credit for it, and I have no problem.
And you're honest about it, so that's good.
But thank you, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so this was great. Does anyone have anything else they want to touch on now? And otherwise we can make a motion to adjourn and circle back next month.
I'll reach out to Bill and Ed and make sure they look at their village email,
Yeah,
Thank you all.
good.
so we don't lose them going forward.
Yeah, and if
Make
they,
sure
if
that
they need, if they need help getting on, they can call clerk treasurer's office, somebody will walk them through it.
Yep. Okay,
Make sure they actually got assigned a
Yeah,
email
everybody
account.
did.
That's what
Everybody did.
it is. They didn't actually send me my email account, so I couldn't figure out how to get on until they told me what my email account was.
Yeah, it's almost
Again,
all the time, the letter of your first name and your last name. At vomny.org.
no, we're .net.
.net.
Are you really?
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what threw me. And
yeah, it messed me up too.
yeah,
didn't know
I think the instructions might have said .org and Cliff sent an updated and then
No,
and
the
Glenn incidentally
initial
that went into,
The email did say .net.
oh, did it?
Yeah,
And Tom told me he was sending him any emails today. Now he's gonna have to find out.
Do you know if there's a way to route it from the village email to your personal so that we're not having to go into that server to check, or is the idea that they don't want that happening and that's why we're doing this?
I think
Don't
the
know.
idea is, so your personal email is not out there.
Yeah, you know what the difficulty we've had, Charles, is that, people sue the village and, then, the people suing the village say, all right, I want to look at Charles Guadagnino's email account at, gmail.com. And, then there's nothing we can do because that's what you were using, to, it's just to
As long
protect
as you were
you.
in government business, you could be foiled.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
and God knows we get enough foils. So it's to protect the village and to protect our volunteers too.
Gotcha. So presumably you have to go into it to be able to, like, you can't do a forward where it goes.
I don't know.
But that,
I think if you call tomorrow, because that might be able to happen, but ask for Cliff. Ask Sally that I said to ask that question to Cliff. And if anybody knows, he knows.
I'm sure there is a way you can forward it, but you can't bypass, you shouldn't bypass the village email.
right. All right, I'll keep you guys posted on that. I had asked him that in an email, and they're going to spam also, so I have to go in and make sure they're not getting rerouted. But I'll keep you posted on that. Tom, I'll send you those 2 documents tonight. Does anyone have anything else they want to share or bridge?
Nope.
Oh,
Motion to adjourn?
Second,
Well, I make the motion. Glenn seconds it.
There you go. All those in favor?
Aye.
have a good night, everyone.
Listen,
All
thank you all very much for doing this and for being so willing to help. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, and I'll see you in
Thank
February.
you.
Good night.
Aye.
Thanks, you
care.
too, Tom. Ciao.
Good night.
night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.